Welcome to Give a Heck. I am your host, Dwight Heck, and for much of my life, lived my life in quiet desperation, wondering how I was going to pay the bills, take vacations, save for retirement, and one day wondering if I would get off the hamster wheel of life and have purpose. A life that most of society lives, which takes us to work, then home, then repeat, and pays us hopefully enough just to survive. The harsh truth that most live with more months than money and have no idea how to live life on purpose, not by accident. This ensures the mass majority are living not just financially broke, however, emotionally and mentally as well due to financial pressures. In each episode, I will introduce you to thoughts, ideas, and guests that can help you to learn how you too can live life on purpose, not by accident.
Good day and welcome to Give a Heck. On today's show, I welcome Peter Christian. Peter has a distinguished career as an executive at Crayola Corporation and currently as a consultant, author, speaker, and adjunct professor. Peter has worked with over 300 companies, helping to increase their profitability by hundreds of millions of dollars while increasing and retaining thousands of jobs. Peter also has 2 best-selling Amazon books. What about the Vermin Problem and Influences and Influencers? Peter is here today to share with us how to become more successful in business by identifying and addressing business issues and problems. I'd like to welcome you to the show, Peter. Thanks so much for agreeing to come on and share with us some of your life journey.
I appreciate you inviting me. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I look forward to our conversation today. So, Peter, I like starting off my show asking people about their origin story. As far back as you're wanting to share and can recollect, because I have found that we really are a combination of our origin from our littlest, little Peter running around all the way up to where Peter is now. Everything was started at some place, and it affected our choices and decisions and directions in life. So if you could do me a favor, Peter, and tell me your origin story and what key things from your childhood to adulthood that led you to where you're at currently.
Okay. Well, I was born and raised in New York City. I was born in Brooklyn and raised in Queens. My family moved when I was 1 year old, so I spent most of my growing up childhood in Queens, New York, and went to school there. Uh, and then from there into college, where I went to Rutgers University in New Jersey, and from there to Lehigh University in Pennsylvania. So you can see I was slowly progressing down south, and I finally wound up here in Florida. So I think I've hit about as far south as you can get without getting off of the continent. Um, Grew up in a fairly normal childhood. My father was an architect, my mother was a homemaker, and I was attracted to engineering from the get-go. I liked science and I liked math. So that was the career I pursued, and that's what I studied in college, and started my profession in that, and then got into management of a variety of things, particularly in operations as opposed to engineering, although engineering was still a part of it. Um, and I was always interested in how things work, why things don't work, and how to make them better. So I think a lot of my career has been involved in that, and how I got into the consulting routine at some point, even when I was working in companies, as you mentioned, Crayola. I did a lot of improvement work, a lot of project work within the company. So when I left there and I was looking for what my next thing was going to be, consultant said to me, most of your career has been in consulting, whether you realize it or not. You might consider doing that. And it was really interesting because when I came out of Lehigh University, I had the opportunity to become the consultant for Price Waterhouse. But I didn't feel that, coming out of school without having a lot of extensive work background, I was qualified to tell somebody 20 or 30 years my senior how they should be doing things when I really didn't have that kind of experience. But then after having worked in the industrial world, I felt I now had a good background and I could certainly tell people what I thought and what I thought was wrong and how to improve things. So my consulting career started, and that's kind of where I've been at.
That's yeah. You've had some interesting things that have gone on in your life in your
Never
career.
dull.
Did you ever think about following your dad's footsteps and being an architect? Did it ever interest you?
Not as an architect, but when I was looking at engineering, I thought about civil, and my father said, nope. He said, one person in his family in the construction industry is enough. That was number one. Number two, I really hate heights. And he goes, well, in construction, you build buildings, really tall buildings. He says, and you're not going to want to go up on those really tall buildings. So I would suggest that too, that you stay away from it. So while I considered it at one point, my father kind of put the kibosh on that. So no, although I did work for a construction company for about 6 summers, and in between semesters in college, they actually did foundationary work. So you'd say, oh, well, you didn't have to go up real high. Well, guess what? They went down really low. So now we were dealing with, construction that was going hundreds of feet down into the ground. So it was still pretty scary to do that. But
You
yeah,
got through it though.
I got through it. Yep, I made it. I survived. I never fell.
That's
Thank goodness.
excellent.
Yeah.
You mentioned too that after you finished school, you had an opportunity to, somebody mentioned you could have gone. You were saying you could have gone and worked for Price Waterhouse Coopers, but you
Yes.
didn't feel like people would listen to you, would take you serious. I find that still a big problem today. That people they look at a person's resume and they don't necessarily take that person at face value except for what they've actually accomplished. They don't really get to know the person, and it's a huge problem. So it's unfortunate, but fortunate because you ended up going other directions. But I just wanted the listeners to realize that happens on the daily. I hear that happen from my clients, people that go and apply for specific things and are told, well, come back when you have more experience. Well, how am I supposed to get more experience if you don't hire me, if you don't give me a shot? So when people hear that sort of stuff and then they get into your circumstance, your first gut reaction is, well, nobody's going to take me serious. Do you think there's a way to change that in people's mindsets so that they, have more confidence and go out and take those chances more so than they would in the past?
Well, unfortunately, that happens to people because in any industry, and consulting is no different, there are people out there who probably shouldn't be in consulting. Either they're not qualified or they're charlatans. They know one thing and how to spout it, but deep down they really don't know what they're talking about, and that makes it bad for everybody else then. So somebody who's been burned by a consultant in the past, or really turned off by them, when they see you, they're going to be leery about you, for sure. So I think you've got to establish a credibility with them. That could be start small. You do a small project with them, and once that succeeds, then you can build on that. But you've got to point back to something that's positive, that is going to reassure them that by hiring you, they're going to get their money's worth. They're not wasting their time, and you really know what you're talking about. Uh, Nowadays in colleges, there's a lot more opportunities with internships and so forth. In fact, I'm involved with a couple of schools in regards to that. So students are getting experiences before they get out of college that they can then point to. Like I said, I was working in construction, okay, not in the field that I was in. So I didn't really have that kind of background coming out. And it was a personal feeling I had, which is why I decided not to go into consulting. I mean, plenty of people do, Price Waterhouse and others do hire, McKinsey hire people right out of school, and they do consulting work. But I just personally didn't feel that I was at that point yet where I could legitimately give good advice to people. because I didn't have an experience to base it off of. Mine was textbook learning and all that stuff. So once I had gotten to the point where I felt I had accumulated enough knowledge and experience to be able to talk to folks in a rational way, then I was willing to take that step. That was just me.
Well, that's
Um,
good though, because look at, you know, and the reason I asked that question, I want the listeners or people that are watching this to understand that it's okay to realize that you have textbook experience, as you mentioned, and that you need to go through the school of hard knocks and learn and start those small projects or start those small whatever it is to help people out. Because in today's day and age, I see it, especially because of the advent of so many people with coaching programs and consulting things, and they put up a shingle and they claim to be this, yet they've never accomplished anything. They're just, as you put, textbook experience, or maybe they don't even have that. They're just good at spreading it on thick and pretending to know what they're talking about. They pose beside you know, a Lamborghini or on a fancy vacation to give people the impression that they're successful so that they will hire them. And unfortunately today there's so many people that get burned, as you mentioned, right? They get taken
yeah,
advantage of, and then and it makes it bad for everybody. So that's why I asked it, because, being humble and admitting that you need to put in the effort, you gotta show some actual results, and then slowly climbing up the ladder. There's nothing wrong with that. Don't expect, there's so many people that get out of school today, or they start a business and they expect their success to happen overnight, and they become impatient.
yes. It takes some time and it takes effort for sure. Before we started this program, I was reading an article online where somebody wrote and they said there's no such thing as good advice. And I thought, I don't quite agree with that. But what the gist of the article was you go online and you see all these things about recommendations about what people should do. Well, they're very generic. They're not specific to you or I and our circumstance. So you read it, and yeah, it really isn't good advice, so to speak, because it probably doesn't really align with what your issue or concern is. You've got to know the individual and the person and what their background is and why they're in the situation they're in order to give them the advice that they really need. So there is good advice. Unfortunately, when it's generic and it's just thrown out there, and there are people out there in, like I said, the consulting industry. It's really funny when people fail in business, they go into, I think, one of three things. They either become financial planners, which is scary because they probably don't have a dollar to their name, and now they're telling other people what they should be investing in, insurance salesmen, or consultants. And Dilbert even had a thing about that where Dogbert says, consultant is the combination of the word con and insult. And unfortunately, there are people that are like that. And like I said, they ruin the profession for everybody else. We have the really good folks who know what they're doing and can provide good consult to folks.
Yeah, and you brought up two of the things that I'm licensed and been doing for 19 years, financial and insurance. And I'm glad you brought it up, though. There's nothing wrong with that. My industry's broken.
Hmm.
It really, really is, and it's in North America. It's worldwide. There's too many people that are transactional based, and they're not relationship, personal based, and actually listening. And we're going to talk about that throughout our conversation here. There's too many people that are just, they're desperate. They don't have a lot of experience, so they get licensed and they go out and hang up their shingle, and they're going to be a financial advisor, planner, insurance rep. They're going to do it all, but yet they can, behind the scenes, people don't realize, people in my industry can't pay their bills, just like a lot of
Hmm.
people that are in commission sales, because most of us are commission sales, and
Yeah.
depending on what you're doing, I also have a huge book of business I get paid on, so that's, I have to manage that, which is fine. But if a person is new into my industry, whether even if they're a banker, they work at a bank, they're giving you improper advice because they want to make sure they hit their bonuses, or if they're an individual that's private like myself that has their own firm, they're desperate to pay their mortgages to make sure they can
Sure.
put food on the table. So it's transactional. They're saying buy this, do that, and it might not be the fact. You know, I spend X amount of meetings with people till I learn, a goal set with them. I help them understand their inflows and outflows of money. Products are the end result. They should not be the
Right.
first result, and that's why. When you brought that up, it made me think to myself, yeah, that's one more person that's got an impression that our industry has got challenges, and I agree with it. It does. So I've been working hard at that for the last 19 years, and
Hmm.
to help people understand that there is a proper way to do financial
Sure.
planning. So
Yep.
appreciate you bringing that up. So
Sure.
Peter, many grew up with knowing the exciting part of Crayola crayons, having spent countless hours coloring as kids and then with their own kids or grandkids like I have. What was it like working at Crayola outside of their product everyone knows and loves?
It was it was a great experience. For one thing, we were allowed to work outside of and encouraged to work outside of our job descriptions, which was great. So I got into a lot of areas because I started in engineering, but like I said, I wound up in operations, but I worked in operations and quality and research and development. I worked with sales and marketing and financial people. So I really got to know the business and the the various functions within a business and a large corporation. And I work with some really intelligent and neat people. And of course, you're working with a product that people know, as soon as they would say, well, where do you work or what do you do? And you tell them Crayola, you were on conversation for the next 10 hours or something. What's it like? And, and oh, you have such a great product.
What's
And
your favorite
I,
color?
what's my favorite color? Red. My favorite color is red. And we keep inventing them. So it's like, oh my God, I never knew there were so many reds. I just said red, and now I found out there were 20 or 30 different reds.
How many
Um,
shades? Yeah.
but it's great when people can relate to what you're doing and know the company, or at least know of the company. um and to just see kids light up. We would typically carry packs of crayons with us and coloring books and stuff, and when we were traveling on a plane or stuff and we'd see a little kid, we would give them that, and it was like, wow, like they just won the lottery or something. And it was cool to be able to do that and to talk about it, but it was a serious business. It wasn't all fun and games. There's a lot of science and chemistry and so forth behind the products that are made by Crayola. And of course, they have to be non-toxic and safe for children to use, because the worst possible thing you could have is to have a child have a problem with your product. That could be a company killer for sure. Um, and we had to grow, and we had all sorts of competition. What was really interesting was we dominated the children's art market. Yeah, I mean, probably right now you probably can't name, or would have difficulty naming one or two competitors of Crayola. But there are, and some of them were indirect competitors. And by that, we ran into the computer and video game buzzsaw, and all of a sudden we were competing for children's attention, time, and dollars, because it was cool to play video games as opposed to necessarily be coloring in a coloring book or whatever the case may be. So we had to determine how to compete against that kind of competition, which is pretty sexy and glamorous, and we were able to do it and to continue to grow and be profitable. So there are always challenges in business that you don't realize. But I just had a wonderful time at Crayola. Made a lot of good friends, worked with a lot of very interesting and smart people, and learned a lot. Learned a lot.
That's awesome. I like how you brought up about the fact of that they were, think outside the box company and allowed you to think outside of your job description. So that's great to hear about them, because so many people don't know the behind the scenes to open up the facade and look inside of what a company's like. You mentioned also about the fact of what the advent of computers and computer games and online coloring. And you know, great stuff to have, but I think it really stifled the creativity of kids. And I'm so glad to see nowadays so many kids coloring. Like my grandkids love coloring. My little 2-year-old granddaughter, my youngest grandchild, she just loves coloring. Whether or not they color great or not, it doesn't matter. It's pretty. They're just, you know, it's something that keeps creativity going, and computers stifled that for many years. I still think it stifles it too much. You know, they play on their tablets and their
Right. And
Game
that's what
Boys
we
and all
went
that
after,
stuff.
was a child and their imagination. Okay. There's nothing better than to give a child a blank piece of paper and crayons or markers and let them go to it. They will come up with some amazing things. Okay. And that's what you want to have. So we didn't try to fight the computer system. We said, here's something you can do that you can't quite get the same experience from a computer. Okay. And then you can post it on the computer after you're done. So we kind of, buddied up with them to a degree. So it was really interesting to see. And we just hit a certain age segment where it was still cool to color and to do all that stuff before you got too big and, you know,
Oh my
too
goodness,
big
the adult coloring world has just exploded though. Like
yeah, we go
unbelievable
back.
how many adults that I know that they have coloring books. Like they buy their big
Oh yeah.
adult coloring books and they sit and they find it very therapeutic to sit and color, and whether or not it's using markers or actually your actual crayon. It's interesting how things come full circle, right?
It was interesting. Right after I joined the company, the president of the company, who had been there for quite a while, was retiring. So they had a retirement for dinner for him. And the primary thing that they gave him as a gift was a portrait of himself. Now, at that time, we only had 64 colors. Crayola's gone into 100 and whatever now. But this portrait was made using all 64 colors that we had.
Wow.
And if you looked at it, you would never suspect that it was done out of crayon. It looked like an oil painting. I
Wow.
mean, so it's amazing the things that you can do with art materials, given the right time and skill level and so forth. It was one of the coolest things I had ever seen. And like I said, I worked for the company, and I couldn't tell it was a crayon picture. It was just really, really amazing. So,
That's
yeah.
exciting though, because you know, I look at the fact of all the things I've read and listened to over the years about how our brain works, our left brain versus our right brain, and somebody as a child and then going all the way now with adults that color, and then you talk about, you know, a portrait being made with crayons and stuff. It keeps our imagination, it keeps us alive and excited. It doesn't, I always talk about with people being stuck in the hamster wheel of life, and you know, it's because they get
Yeah.
stuck into doing the same routine all the time, binge watching television, being on their phone, their computer, and they're not doing anything that really excites their mind or makes them have to think. Like even coloring inside the lines is you have to think about it,
Yes, you do. Yes, you
right?
do.
So thank you for sharing that. I appreciate
Sure
it.
thing.
So, Peter, in order to help people, one needs to be a great listener to understand their concerns and issues. Why is listening so important in today's day and age of those who feel unheard and unappreciated?
Again, I'll go back to my Crayola experience. I was still working with, when I joined the company, people who had been in the early stages of the company. Now, the company wound up being 100 years old, but so they weren't 100 years old, but who were there when it wasn't as mechanized and so forth. And again, my curiosity to find out why the things were where they were. So I would sit and listen to these folks. They would talk about how the crayons were formed, and then they would take them in boxes to people's homes, and kids and moms and so forth would sit there and roll the labels onto the crayons at their kitchen table, fill it up, bring it back, get another box, and get paid for it. Now it's fascinating to me to hear those kind of stories. And you kind of lose that sometimes. So unless you listen to people, and when you listen to them, it's amazing the things that people will tell you. and the information that you will gather just by asking some simple questions and letting them go to it. And in the consulting line of work, when you're trying to find out what the problems are and how to correct them, it's important for you to know why things are the way they are to begin with, how they got to that point, what's been tried, what has worked, what hasn't worked, why it didn't work. It could be that it was just a misapplication of something, and if it was done a little bit differently or better, it would have worked. But you don't learn any of that by going in and saying, I know the answer. Okay. I hate people like that who in 30 seconds can tell you what all your problems are and why they are. They don't know. You've got to really find out. And how do you find out? You find out by talking to people and listening to them and not telling them what you know, listening to what they know. Now, it's not going to be so good. You got to separate out the good and the bad, and you're going to get BS and so forth. So you got to, but if you talk to enough people, you'll find out what the real truths are, and you can put it together. So if you're not listening, if you're not paying attention, if you're, and people also will respond well to you. Everybody wants to be heard. The question is, are they allowed to be heard? In too many instances, you see where somebody says, just do your job. You don't need to do anything else. We don't need to hear about this problem or that problem or whatever the case may be. And they're the experts. They're the ones that are doing it day in and day out. They know what the good things are and the not so good things are. They have ideas as to how to improve what's happening. They don't want to deal with problems day in and day out. And if you just listen to them, you get some pretty good information and good ideas about how to fix things. So a good consultant does that, but it takes some time. And of course, a lot of places don't want to give you the time. They want that instantaneous fix. They want the expert to come in who knows everything, who's just going to wave that magic wand and everything is going to be hunky-dory. But the good companies that realize that you have to have information, and there's an old saying, a consultant is somebody who borrows your watch in order to tell you what time it is. In essence, that's not so far-fetched, because if you don't have it and you can't tell, then how are you going to tell somebody what time it is? So you've got to use whatever resources available to you in order to do that. So listening is a key thing. And listening means truly listening, not interjecting, maybe clarifying, when you're not sure about something or you want them to elaborate on it. But otherwise, not interjecting yourself, truly listening and getting the information and then dealing with it, then synthesizing it to put together whatever the fix is going to be, whatever the plan is going to be, and so forth. And even then, you're playing it back. You're putting it to them because we get things wrong sometimes. We make misjudgments. So you play it back to see if it makes sense. Because quite honestly, whatever fix you come up with, if the people that you're trying to help don't buy into it, it ain't going to work, even if it's the best fix in the world. So the more you can involve people in there and utilize some of their ideas and give them credit for it, the better it will be. Well, I had one instance where we were having problems with the molding machines that we had, and we had to fix them. We had to fix 26 machines. If we didn't fix them, we were out of business because there's no place you can go that's going to have that kind of capacity to make crayons. And the vice president said to me at the time, I want you to talk to the molders. Those are the people who ran the machines, and find out what improvements we can make. So I went out. I went to the production manager and I said, I have to do this. And he kept resisting and he wouldn't set up the meeting. And finally I said, Alan, you got to do this because guess what? The vice president, Terry, is not leaving me alone. If he's not leaving me alone, I'm not leaving you alone. So let's set up the meeting. So he finally did. So we sat down with the molders. And the first thing we got is, they've asked us before, but they don't pay attention. So why should we bother telling you? And I said, well, because I'm different, all right, and I've been charged with this. So we sat and we talked, and they came up with like a half a dozen things that could be improved on the machines as we were redoing them. And we went through them all, and we found out that I think it was 5 of the 6 worked fine. The sixth one was going to be difficult and wasn't going to make sense. So we went back to them. We said, "Here's what we came up with, and here's what we're going to do. But the sixth one we can't. But how can we work around it?" We came up with a fix, and sure enough, when the machines came out and the improvements were made, we went through it. We sat with them and went through everything, and they said, "Wow, nobody ever did that to us before or for us before." And you think to yourself, why not? These people, the experts, they deal with it every day. Okay, we spend a couple of hours on it and we think we're the experts. We're not. It's a guy who spends 8-10 hours a day, for 220 days a year for 20 years. I mean, that's a lot of time spent. They know what's going on. So listening is definitely an important thing, and then doing something about it.
Yeah, I love how very good at explaining that. The workers definitely should be part of the solution. There's so much corporate culture, even in today in 2022, where it flows from the top down when really it should flow from the bottom up. That the people at the top could do their jobs that much more effectively and make the company work that much better if they just realize the difference between them and the worker at the bottom. There is no difference. You're both humans. You just got different titles. You got different job responsibilities. Obviously, it could be different pay, but your thought process or your ability to help a company shouldn't be any less important if you're the factory worker working on the line, like you said, with the molding machines, as opposed to the person that's sitting at the top. So good for you for being somebody that was tenacious. That's another thing a person has to do when you want to be a good listener. You have to be tenacious. You can't just lay down and say, "Okay, fine, you don't want to talk to me, then great, we'll just stay at the status quo." And people wonder why
Right.
corporations have large employee turnaround. Even
Yep.
management doesn't matter if it's just a factory worker. Management turnaround, right? I see that and hear about it all the time, and a lot of it has to do with the corporate culture. And to me, it always factors back to listening, right?
Yes. That's a good start.
Well, yeah, I've had people say to me, if you had to give your, I had somebody here recently when I was on a podcast ask me if you had to give your young self, one piece of advice, in your teens into your 20s, what would it have been? Be a better listener is what I told them, and they were
And
shocked.
don't think that you've got all the answers or that you need to have all the answers. There's a lot of people that you can tap to get information from, okay?
Yeah,
And you utilize that. Too many people think they have to have all the answers, and nobody does. Nobody does. Period. Nobody.
the
Just plain
best the
simple.
best the best leaders are those that give up their weaknesses and delegate and realize that other people are experts. And one of the things too, listeners, if you're that person and you're going to ask for advice and support and help, make sure you give that person credit. Don't turn
Yeah.
around and be that person that takes the credit for something that you didn't think of. Take credit for your own strengths, but you can actually get a lot of admiration from others by saying, John, Sally, Fred, whoever it is, give us this information, and kudos to them. We wouldn't have been able to do better manufacturing, better sales, better whatever if it wouldn't have been for their input. That person's chest is going to puff out. They're going to be that much better of a worker. They're going to also be somebody that's going to share their opinions more readily and in a kind way. They're not going to sit back and stew and be upset because things
Right.
aren't functioning right and they don't feel like anybody cares to listen to them. So, listeners, it does make a huge difference in life.
Yes.
So,
Yep.
Peter, you help businesses by identifying and addressing business issues and problems. What are some of the consistent issues that businesses face, and how do you help them address these challenges?
Some of them buy systems, information systems, and think that all their problems are solved and that the system is going to do everything for them. And they sadly find out that that's not the case, that sometimes there's even more work involved in operating an information system than there was before, because you're going to get out copious amounts of information. And also, if you're not aware of what it is that the system is telling you, you can, you don't just turn it on and then do everything it tells you to do, because again, it only reacts to whatever is programmed into it. And if some aspect occurs that it has no information on, or no basis of computing, it's not going to give you the right information. You still need human intervention. You need interpretation. Uh, Numbers will come out sometimes and they're going to be wrong because of input errors, or whatever the case may be. Or sometimes there are bugs in the system. So you better understand what the basics are, and the basis is for what's coming out, and look at numbers and say, yeah, that makes sense, or no, that doesn't. That makes no sense whatsoever. We have a problem here. We got to fix. So I think too often when individuals go to install systems into their businesses, they think that all their problems are solved, and they're not. There's a lot of work involved in that. Uh, and also, you've got to put stuff in there in order to get stuff out. It doesn't just generate it on its own. There's that old saying, GIGO, you've probably heard, GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. Well, that's very, very true, and I've seen that before. So there are a lot of companies I saw where they had perfectly good systems, but they just weren't utilizing them properly. They weren't installed properly. They weren't functioning properly. They were misinterpreting the data, or they didn't know how to interpret the data. Uh, so got to get that all corrected. I always say, if you can't do it by hand with a calculator and a pencil, then you're not ready to do it with a computer system. You're not ready to do that. And there were occasions where talk companies out of buying a system for a while until they could do it more manually and understand what it was they were dealing with. And then they were ready to take the next step. So I'd say that's one big thing. Second big thing is staying up with the times. Technologies do change, and they're changing faster and faster. What is it now? A computer is obsolete, what, in a year, 2 years, and the new one's coming out. We had that personal experience. I bought a new laptop because my old one was on the fritz. 9 months later, my wife needed a new one. We wanted to get the same model I had, and it wasn't available anymore. It was obsolete, and they were on to the next model already. 9 months. It was like, holy mackerel. So you've got to stay up with the new technologies, with some of the new thought processes that are coming out in business. Because the new products, consumers' tastes change, their wants change, and if you're not staying up with that stuff, you're going to fall behind. And where you might have been in the forefront before, you're not in the forefront so much anymore. Just think about companies that have come and gone in the last 10 years, who might have been industry leaders at one point, and they don't exist anymore, or they're way down in the pecking order. Blackberries, BlackBerry was a thing I had growing up. You don't hear about Blackberries anymore, right?
No.
I mean, really, they're gone. Blockbuster Video, they were the predominant force in you doing movie rentals and so forth. Don't exist anymore. In fact, I even heard that Netflix might be in trouble and on its way out. Um, Retail stores, who didn't get into the online shopping routine, so they stuck to the brick and mortar stores, suffering big time. The ones that are still doing well, they also have a fairly large online presence as well, so their customers can deal in a variety of different fashions. Um, how we book travel, you know, planes and cars and airlines and hotels and you name it has all changed. We had to go through travel agents before. What's a travel agent anymore? You don't hear about them. You can do it online, and you can do it quickly and efficiently. I mean, so you've got to stay up with the technologies, and companies that resist, that go, nope, 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 we're going to do it the way we always did it. They're in for a long, hard road. Yeah, and maybe that road ends at some point. And I've seen that happen. I've had some clients that went belly up because they didn't stay up with the latest and the greatest and got themselves in trouble. So I'd say that's a big one. And the other one is where they don't they say they want your help, but they don't truly want your help. Unfortunately, I've seen clients that I've gone into where it's almost like an exercise to prove how smart they are, and to prove how wrong you are. And I don't never quite understand that, why you would bring somebody in, pay them dollars, and then try to show that you're smarter, or have a better idea as to how to run the enterprise than they do. uh, I watch these shows where a guy goes in and tries to fix a restaurant or a bar, and they're telling him about how wonderful they are, and he goes, "Well, why am I here? And how much are you losing every month now?" "Oh, $10,000 a month." "Well, if everything is so swimmingly good and you know everything, then why am I here, and why are you losing 10,000? Why aren't you making 10,000?" And then they kind of give them that deer in the headlights look. So it's some of that attitude issue, that I'm smarter than you. I invented this business. I know how to best run it. Da 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 da. Well, then fine. Have a good time. I'll leave, and I'll buy you for pennies on the dollar someday, or start another enterprise, whatever the case. So I'd say those are three biggies that I run into, and I've seen too often, unfortunately, attitude issues. So
People can't get out of their own way.
it
You know,
never ceases to amaze me, some of the stupid things we do
well,
and we say.
it's in my own industry too. I'll sit down and I'll help out an individual, or a small business entrepreneur or whatever, and I'll give them advice, and I'll set up systems in place. And this dials all the way back to even before I got into finance. I used to own a computer consulting firm, so I did lots of consulting, and I'd go into government, or I'd go into corporations, and I'd sit and show them how they can save money. We'd put processes into place. They'd hire me on a contract for X amount of period of time, and then find out from people that I still were friends with, that were there, that were employees, that months after the fact they went back to their old ways. And why did you waste your money hiring me? It makes no absolute sense. So listeners, if you are a person that uses somebody to help you, with your services, your processes, be humble about it. Realize that it might bother you between your 6 inches, that somebody's pointing out that you did something incorrectly and this is a better way to do it, or here's what caused you to lose, like you were saying, 10,000 a month. Just be humble. Pride can be good and bad. In most cases, pride is a bad thing for most people. If you paint a wall and you do a really good job, you can have pride in the fact you did a good job of painting the wall. But most people have bad pride. It's not good pride. It's they're very stuck in, they don't want anybody to be critical of them. Well, guess what? If your business is struggling or it's already failing, you got to dump your pride and just be humble and learn.
Or you're going to fail, and then you won't be in business.
Exactly. You'll be like you said, somebody will be buying you up pennies on the dollar, or that person that you didn't want to listen to the advice can turn around and become your competitor, because now you've just given them all this information about what not to do.
I had one client. The owner was an inventor. He was a very smart inventor, but he was a very bad business person. He had the best product on the market. It was wood and pellet burning stoves. But he hired a bunch of family and friends who really didn't know what they were doing, and they were running the business into the ground. Brought us in to in order to help to straighten things out. And what he had in mind was he wanted to put in an automated warehouse system, which was going to be extremely expensive and very inefficient, and he didn't need it. And that's all he wanted to do. And at the end of the day, that's what we left with, even after he paid us a lot of money to work through and come up with what he should and shouldn't do. And within a year, he sold the business out to a competitor, and every dollar he got in that he sold the business for went to pay the debts that he had racked up. So at the end of the day, he wound up with nothing. His product is still on the market, and it again is one of the best selling and probably best products, but he don't make it anymore. So again, when you don't listen to people, you, the
It's
outcome
like
could be
that.
very bad,
Yeah,
very
it's
bad.
like that in life in general. You know, people that people think that they're the end all and be all, and they can't get out of their own way. Even if they're not a business owner. They're just
Yeah.
an employee wondering why other people are getting promoted, why they're getting raises, and they're not getting it. Well, 99% of the time is that person stuck in a hamster wheel. They can't get out of their own way. They're just constantly tripping over themselves, and they can't admit that somebody might know something they don't know, and just again be humble, learn, and move forward in life. And it happens not just with businesses, it's right down to the core of an individual. Not even want to
Yeah.
only listen to their parents. Right, when
Yeah,
they're
really.
younger, right? Then there's an
Yep.
excuse. They're younger
Then
and
there's an
their
excuse.
brain's still developing. Well, if you're in your mid 20s into your 30s and you're still stuck in a rut and angry because everybody else is pushing forward and you're not, is a good indicator that maybe you need to listen and be humble and take some advice.
If you're 35 and still living in your parents' basement, there's a problem. Yeah.
Yeah, no doubt.
There's a problem.
Exactly. So, Peter, you have two best-selling Amazon books, as we were
Yes.
talking about. What about The Vermin Problem and Influences and Influencers? Can you please share what these books are about and what can listeners expect to learn from them?
Sure. Would love to. The first one, what about the vermin problem? Interesting title, and we may get to that as to how that got named. But that is a collection of experiences that I had, and not all of them, but some of the more interesting ones that I had, uh, both working in corporate world and also as a consultant, where you would just shake your head sometimes in a positive sense, like, wow, that's really cool, or in a negative sense, like, why are they doing that? And oh my goodness, okay, and categorized into three categories: the good, the bad, and the ugly, just like the Clint Eastwood film, uh, that highlighted good experiences that I had with companies that listened and did the right things and were very successful. Companies that did not so good things, bad things, and caused more grief for themselves, maybe not corporate threatening, but certainly where they had to spend more time working on problems than they needed to. And then the ugly, where they really did some disastrous stuff. And like the one company that I mentioned to you, he had to wind up selling the business to a competitor and getting out and got nothing for all his time and effort. And it's really interesting that there's a very fine line between making a good decision and making a bad decision, between being successful and being unsuccessful. Um, and just by dialing it slightly differently, you can turn a bad situation into a good, or conversely, a good situation into the bad. So you've got to be really careful about when you're making decisions and the decisions you're making. And again, getting good information and listening and making sure you've done your due diligence before you plow ahead. Not everything is an emergency where you have to pull a fire alarm and rush everybody out the door. You can take some time, but you need to make good decisions. So it's learning experiences that I had that I'm pointing out to other folks and going, if you come across something similar like this, do it this way and don't do it that way. And you will be very much happier and more successful in your enterprise. Uh, The name, What About the Vermin Problem, came from a client that I had. And we were working with them to look at redoing their facility to get the proper sizing for their growth, whether they were going to stay in the same facility and put an expansion on, or potentially move to a new facility. Uh, and as we were going through the project with them, myself and one of my companions, we would get conflicting information. We'd get bad information. We'd get information they would give us one day that they would change the next day. So you can imagine how reliable it was. Sometimes we weren't getting what we were asking for, and we were getting stuff that we weren't asking for that really didn't make any sense. But anyway, so we struggled through all of that. We finally were able to come up with a plan, which was to put an expansion on, to move the operations around because they had a very poor flow of materials, and we were going to put production where the warehousing was and warehousing where the production was, and so forth. So we sit down to have our meeting with them to present this. We give them the layout, and they said to us, well, what about the vermin problem? And I looked at my companion, and he looked at me, and I shrugged my shoulders and he shrugged his, and we went, what vermin problem? They said, well, we're in an old mill, okay, and we still have vermin in here because there's still remnants of the grains and stuff that we were dealing with. And you're thinking, have you ever heard of exterminators? They're used all over the place by all sorts of food industries and so forth. And they said, so you can't put the production because that's kind of where the vermin are. Well, that's where the warehousing was. So guess what was sitting there? All the materials they were using. So you couldn't process with vermin, but you could allow your materials to sit there and have vermin doing whatever vermin do to materials. And we said to them, we've been working with you for 7 months. This never came up. Why did you do it now? And that was in a section under communication. Okay, where if you don't communicate, and it kind of goes back to what we were talking about before with listening, but also offering advice. I mean, we asked tons of questions. They never offered any of that. How the heck would we know that that was an issue unless they told us? Because we never saw it when we were there. So apparently it happened in the off hours or whatever. About how important communication is. If you want somebody to do a good job for you, you've got to communicate well with them. You've got to give them the information that they need. If you withhold stuff or you slant it, guess what the result is probably going to be? It's going to be wrong. It's going to be inaccurate, not because they didn't know what they were doing, but because they didn't have the right information. They didn't have good information to deal with. So the gist of that book is, do the things the right way. Don't do things the wrong way. You will have a happier life, a more successful career. Your company will do a lot better. And you will be, at the end, a lot happier person for it. The second book, Influences and Influencers, that deals more with what affects us. And it starts maybe at an early age as kids. And certainly growing up, I mean, we have an influence from our parents and our teachers, but also as we go through our teen lives and into our adult lives and so forth, there are a lot of people that influence us one way or the other, either positively or negatively. And we take from those experiences, and they also help us, and in some instances harm us or try to harm us, either purposefully or not so, but just because of whatever. And I relate to those experiences. A lot of people who have had influences on my life, how I think, how I act, how I react, why I continually am listening to people and learning and getting different perspectives. Because again, I'm not always right, and there's always new information, and there's new things that happen that I might not have been aware of before that'll make my decisions better. But it's really what impacts us, and realizing that, and that even after all the experiences we've had, there can still be more information that comes. that can change our opinions and how we act and react to different things. And then that plays back to the first book, which is the decisions we make. And a lot of that is based off of the experiences we had, the people who have advised us and haven't advised us, and whatever the case may be. So they're kind of companions to a degree, but they're also standalones. And I think in both instances, if people read them, and hopefully they will, and the people that I've talked to that have read them, a number of them has said, I wish I had known about this stuff earlier in my career. Well, you know about it now, so do something about it. Okay. But for those who are still early in their career, pick it up and read it. Because if other people are saying, I wish I had, then you probably are too. You'll find out that you're running into similar experiences, you're running into similar people, you're having similar situations. And if these can be of help to you in guiding you in your thought process and how you're going to make decisions, then so much the better. So they're really kind of help books, not just for careers, but also for life in general, because we deal with people all the time. We deal with things all the time. Again, we act and react differently based on our experiences. I think they're good life lessons, not just business lessons, although they were written primarily for the business community.
Well,
So,
in life, though, the things to run business, as you just mentioned, right? Whether you're an entrepreneur, self-employed, or you run a big business, it starts with our 6 inches between our ears. We need to have a lot of personal growth and development and stop being stagnant. continue
yes,
to continue to grow and realize that till the day you take your last breath, even if you're not working anymore, your brain's a giant computer. It doesn't know the difference between the truth and the lie. So garbage in, garbage out, like you said, when it comes to even computers. But it's our own mindset. We got to be putting good things in and be willing to say, "Hey, I don't know it all," or
and don't
here's what it used to be, and this is what I thought it was. Really, it changed. Oh, okay. Be open minded to change.
and don't be afraid to challenge what people tell you. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing. Quite honestly, if somebody gets defensive when you question them about something, whether it's for getting more information or elaborating on a point or better understanding, if they get annoyed, then chances are good what they're telling you has some problems to it, because they shouldn't be defensive. They should welcome that, because you're engaged. You want to know. Okay, you're not just taking and going, "Oh, okay, yeah, what he said must be true." Because guess what? I can find 10 people who will have 10 different opinions than that. Okay, and you got to sort out which one makes the most sense for you. So questioning things is not a bad thing, as long as you're not doing it in a that kind of adversarial, well, I'm going to try to show you how much smarter I am than you are and why you're wrong and all that stuff. In that case, that's a whole different thing. But if it's truly for their understanding and buy-in and so forth, there's absolutely nothing wrong. And I encourage it, because then they really want to know. They want to know why it works. They're not just taking it face value. There's so much stuff out there that we get thrown at. And if we take it all at face value and don't find out what's behind it, we're asking for trouble, quite honestly. So I encourage people to challenge, okay? Because if you can challenge it and they can prove it, then you got a winner. If they can't prove it, be careful about doing stuff, because there's a lot of bad advice out there too.
Oh, of course, there's so much bad advice out there. So,
Yes.
but unfortunately, we got to develop critical thinking processes and listen.
Yep.
It all goes back to us listening to whatever it is that we want to learn, and then going out and I guess it is a form of second guessing, and go out and get a second opinion.
Yeah.
Right? Go out and
Nothing
find
wrong.
out, and then look at both pieces of information or multiple pieces of information, and then use your ability to figure out what is the right path. And even then, it might not be the right path, but be willing to correct it. Don't be
Yeah.
stuck in going, "Oh, I'm going to keep on doing this." If it's failing, change. Go look again. Start over. right? If it takes you like a Colonel Sanders 1,000 times to figure it out before you can get money to, start KFC, oh well, just keep on keeping on.
I'll give you a very simple example, real quickly. I went to a skin doctor, dermatologist, had some bumps on my legs, and it was a result of laying in the sun when I was younger, and it's called keratosis, okay? And they're non-malignant bumps, but unfortunately, and they don't look the best. And I said, "What can I do for this?" And the doctor says, "Absolutely nothing. It is what it is. You're just going to have to live with it." Well, I kept looking at it, and it was bothering me. So I went online and I started to read, and there's all sorts of stuff you can do to treat it. There's a peroxide, hydrogen peroxide solution you can use, and I started to use that. You can use apple cider vinegar and put that on. I started to do it, and all of a sudden they're going down and they're disappearing and stuff. And here was a doctor who told me, "Oh, there's absolutely nothing you can do for that." So sometimes you got to challenge, the expert, okay? And you find out that maybe they didn't give you all the information, or maybe they didn't know themselves, and you find out. So don't be afraid to challenge stuff and to try some things if need be, if what you're being told just doesn't make sense. So
No, a lot
simple
of
thing.
professionals. A lot of
Yes.
professionals are like that, though. They get stagnant from accountants to. I find it really bad in the accounting industry. No offense to in picking on accountants, because there's a
That's
lot of
okay.
good ones out there, but there's a lot of accountants out there that are still giving out former tax advice that has changed years ago. They don't stay up on their game. Lawyers, doctors,
Yep.
financial people, you got to stay up on your game, people, right? If
Yes.
you're in
Absolutely.
the industry of serving and helping others, right? Make sure you're at the top of your game. And if you don't know, here's one simple piece of advice, listeners. Say to people, you know what? This is what I believe it to be. But let me get back to you so I can better serve you. I want to double check my information, see if there's any more up to date information than the last time, because I haven't dealt with this in a while. This is something that, my wheelhouse was good. Now it needs to be refreshed. So don't be afraid to be genuine and honest. You will gain more favor from people and trust by admitting that maybe I'm not 100% on this. I'm going to go find out for you.
Yep. Or if you give a piece of bad advice and you find out, don't be afraid to go back and say, "I was wrong, and here's the correct information, and I apologize for that." Okay. People will forgive you for that, not for sticking your feet in the ground and saying, "Nope, nope, nope, I'm right." Forget about whatever else you heard. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, Peter, if you had to give our listeners one last closing message, what would you tell them in regards to giving a heck and never giving up?
Only when you give up will you lose. There are many instances throughout history, whether in business or whatever, of people who didn't give up. Okay, they were sure about where they were headed. They didn't have all the information. They didn't do it all right to begin with, but they didn't give up, and they ultimately were successful. If you watch on the History Channel, the businesses that made America, the foods that made America, all different things that made America. These were all people who didn't know any better, but had a dream and an idea, and they followed it through, and they were persistent. And if they hadn't been, we wouldn't be where we are today. We wouldn't have some of the what we call modern miracles, or things that we take for granted. So be persistent. Don't let people discourage you. Okay. Now, you've got to determine for yourself whether it makes sense or not. Okay. But don't just throw the towel in the first time that you have a problem, because that's too easy, and then things won't get done, and you won't be a success. Then you'll give up too easily. Uh, so be persistent and be consistent and follow your dream, but don't make it a dream, make it a reality at some point. There are too many dreamers out there who never follow through, and that's all it remains, is a dream. It remains potential and not reality. If you do that, you may not be 100% successful, But if you get 75% or 80% of the way there, you've done a pretty good job. All right. Because you're 75 or 80% further than you would have been if you hadn't done what you do. And if you hit 100%, so much the better. So I would say that's a lot of success, and successful people do that. They don't take no for an answer, and they continue to do what they feel is right.
Great. That's a great answer. Thanks for sharing that. So our
Sure.
time is almost up. I want to respect our listeners and your time. However, before we
Okay.
end, can we please tell the listeners what is the best way to reach you?
One of three ways. My email address, which is my initials PH, and then my last name Christian, and then the number 53 at gmail.com. So you can email me if you have a question or you want to discuss something or whatever the case may be. Second one is on LinkedIn. I have a LinkedIn profile, Peter Christian. That's a fairly common name, believe it or not, especially Christian. A lot of Christians out there. But if you look for author and professor and consultant and so forth, you will finally track me down. And I am listed. I live in Florida, so I don't think there are too many right by me. So that's number two is LinkedIn, and you can again then send me a message and we can book up. And the third is I have a website that deals with my books and with writings and so forth. And that is, the website is Pete, P-E-T-E, forget about the R, and then christianbooks.com. So it's all one word, petechristianbooks.com. And there's also a way in there you can send me a message if you want to talk, and let me know. Usually that slings over to either my email or LinkedIn, one of the two. But any one of those three, send me a message, tell me you would like to chat, or if you've read some of my stuff and you want to comment on it, or you have a different opinion, which I always welcome, because again, I'm not 100% there, so I'm always learning new things. So let me know what your opinion is about something that I wrote, and we can go from there.
That sounds fantastic. And
Okay.
listeners, you can access all this information. I'll make sure is in the show notes. You can access it at giveaheck.com. Go into the podcast portal and you will see the information in regards to how to access Peter. So again, thanks for coming on the show, Peter. So
Thank you for having me.
yes, it's been fantastic conversation. So again, thanks so much for being on Give a Heck, Peter. I appreciate your time and sharing some of your experiences so that others too can learn it is never too late to give a heck.
Thank you for taking time out of your day and listening to Give a Heck. If you find value, I'd appreciate you sharing with your friends and family so they too can learn how to live life on purpose, not by accident. So you do not miss the next episode, please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and please also post a review. I look forward to reading your comments. This has been Dwight Heck. If you want to check out other podcast episodes or today's show notes, please check out my website, giveaheck.com. And until next time, together let us all strive to give a heck.